Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a meeting of the Comprehensive Financial Advisory Committee of the Town of Barnstable. Today is November 27th, 2023, and this meeting is being recorded by the Town of Barnstable and will be broadcast on the Government Access Channel 8. The agenda for this meeting is on the town website. Chuck, will you call the roll, please? You're muted.
Being muted. There we go. Sorry. Lillian.
Here.
Neil.
Yes.
Hector.
I'm here.
Jim.
Yes.
I don't see these people, but I'll ask anyway. Wendy.
Wendy is not going to be here.
Jackie. And Chris, I see just logged on.
Chris joined, yes.
I'm here.
All right, Chris is here and I'm here, so we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we get into the topics of discussion, I noticed that we have a few members of the town council here. So we have Betty, who is one of our regular, and Paul Neary is here, and a new member, Kristen Turkelson. So if you would, Kristen, if you'd like to introduce yourself, welcome.
Hi, how are you? I'm Kristen. I live in Centerville and newly elected and happy to be here tonight. And I'm going to be off camera because I'm eating my dinner before the 7 o'clock meeting tonight.
Okay. Well, welcome. And
Thank
what
you.
we have is a very informal meeting. So if you're listening and if you have questions, just pop in and we'll join our discussion. And Teresa, nice to see you. Paul, you want to say hi?
Hello all, and I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving.
Thank you. And Betty, it's nice to see you. All right, we'll move right into our business then. The meeting minutes of the November 13th meeting. We need to have a motion to approve.
I move.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the November 13th meeting. Are there any comments, corrections, discussion?
Was this, I just have a question. Was this derived in part from the artificial intelligence version? Seriously.
A little bit, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's good. It's a labor saving.
I'll tell you, this is so comprehensive and accurate.
Well, thank you.
It's
Yeah,
really good.
the AI companion version was much less detailed than what Teresa provided us.
Yeah.
They're really good.
limitations.
Yeah.
Yeah. Teresa,
Yeah.
one of the things I like is that you've, in prior minutes, it was always, all the comments were attributed ad nauseum to people who made them. And here you're just focusing on the substance of the topics that were addressed in the meeting. I think it makes for a better record of the meeting. So congratulations for that.
Well, thank you.
Well,
Everybody likes their minutes different, so I'm glad you're pleased with them.
well, the previous 18 sets of minutes were really quite formidable. Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Okay, not seeing any comments or corrections, then Chuck, will you take the vote, please?
Will. Lillian.
Yes.
Neil.
Yes.
Hector.
Yes.
Jim.
Yes.
Chris.
Yes.
And Chuck is yes.
Thank you. All right, we'll move to the next issue. Neil has looked at other towns' annual reports. But before we begin, let me give you an overview of why we have it. this goes back a very long time, and I think Laura Cronin was the chair of CFAC at the time. And basically what we wanted to do was to provide an overview of the town's operations, revenue, so that the residents and prospective residents and the business owners would know what was going on in the town. So basically it was a distillation of all of the aspects of finance, revenue, and expenditures. So that's, and we had decided that it would be objective. There's no insertion of any opinion of any sort. So that's the basic framework of our past and up to 2024 of our overview. So with that, Neil, would you like to tell us what other towns have done?
Sure. Mark, would you like to add anything to that in terms of objectives that you also have for the overview report?
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Yes, we originally created this report out of a slow time that the committee had after the budget season was completed. There was a period of time where, we really weren't that active waiting for the next budget cycle to begin. And so we looked at what's called the Popular Annual Financial Report library that was on the GFOA's website, and came up with this idea, presented it to the sitting committee at the time, that maybe perhaps we could do something along these lines, creating a budget and brief document. And so that was the genesis of the report. We pitched it to the committee. I think at first, the committee at the time was a little skeptical as to whether or not it would succeed and it would provide any real benefit to the public. But I think we've done it for maybe 9 years now, Lillian, and
Oh, yeah, I think it's at
a lot
least
of
9
positive
years.
feedback.
Yeah.
Continue to do it. That's it. Thanks, Neil.
So I'm going to ask Mark, was this an initiative that was to allow a smoother display of the materials that we typically cover throughout the year?
Well, yeah, we were trying to take that 500-page budget document on top of a 250-page capital budget document and condense it all down into 12 pages or less, so that anybody in the community could pick up and get a sense as to what the town's priorities were for the upcoming fiscal year in terms of capital program and operating budget, and really what the makeup of the community, and including some information about our fire districts, right? Because we're very unique in the sense that we have 5 separate independent fire districts in this town, and a lot of taxpayers weren't clear at that time of how those why those existed and how they affect their tax bills. So we kind of dedicated a whole page just to that one particular area of our community.
I mean, is someone coming in at the tail end? I mean, just recently, I mean, I've expressed this before. I've been thoroughly impressed with the level of detail in the synopsis of information that you can quickly get a feel for what's going on in the town. So I think you all have done a Herculean effort to bring about a transition. And I went back and looked at some of the old stuff that we did in early 2000s. It was kind of laughable, actually, but it's what we had at the time. That's how we did it, and this is incredible. So,
Well, I think the goal, Jim, is to see if we as a group are satisfied with this, and if there are any learnings to be had from looking at what other communities do.
Yeah,
I agree with you, Neil, that the last couple of reports, especially this year's report, is very thorough, and we've added more graphs and more tables and have cut down on the narrative, and so I think it's gotten better. It does take work, but we're trying to see if there's anything more that we could do to make it even more usable for the educated taxpayer out there.
I'd also just, if I could add my 2 cents, I think I had a slightly different take on, my thought was more, as opposed to critiquing the piece that we do, and I don't disagree with anything Hector just said. You know, there was a lot of discussion 2 meetings ago about whether we are maximizing viewership and readership for the document. And there were comments about making it a little less complicated. And so my thought that I just throw out as Neil begins his discussion was, you know, maybe we have something like a Reader's Digest version of it to expand readership, as opposed to making wholesale changes to the document as it's evolved, which I think will appeal to some target market segment. I don't know what that is, but somebody who wants a little more detail. But if we could, you know, double interest in town finances by producing a, you know, 4-page document that really went at a high level, but still shared information that would be valuable to the reader, you know, should we think about doing that? And so I just throw that out there in the hope that it'll be part of the discussion tonight.
I think that's what Neil was thinking about as he began to review the publications of other towns. So Neil, it's all yours.
Okay. Yeah, I had never, ever seen such a thing as Mark said, they call them popular annual financial reports, or some of them are now called budget at a glance. So you guys mostly know me, and so I had to dig into it and get smarter about what other people do in these things. So I looked at at the time I wrote the 3-page briefing I sent out a week or so ago, at about 50 reports, and actually spoke with about 6 different people from who help create these and distribute these things for other towns, and found 4 different studies, and actually got an email back from the Government Financial Officers Association today, confirming that the reason I couldn't find anything from them about the reach or the penetration or anything else about response rates or downloads of PDFs is because they've never looked at it. It's a wild place out there, even though that has clearly been promoted for more than a dozen years by the GFOA. What I found was I tried to consolidate down into 3 pages. Basically, in design, what we do is not that much different than a lot of other cities, except that we do ours in Word. And it appears that most other towns actually do it with graphic artists, as you can probably see from the examples I included. But the report lengths are anywhere from 2 pages to the longest one I could find was 32 pages. It's fairly common to start them with a letter from the city manager with their photo, unlike ours. The report content is just all over the map. Some, including one of the 2-pagers I included here, is very bare bones, and it's basically the revenues and the expenses. Others, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, is 32 pages, and it has anything you might want to know, only outdone by one from Oklahoma, which has everything you'd want to know and then some. So we're in the middle of that group. Some of them, and I thought this was a really good idea to get interest from the public, featured results that occur because of the city spending. Service improvements, service levels, key projects and what they deliver to the town. I think that's something that I was impressed by. You didn't have to be a financial person to kind of understand that. But the other thing is that a lot of cities, not the majority, but most of them change their formats over time. Some cities add sections, some transition or add a budget at a glance. Raleigh, North Carolina actually just did that in the last year. They both have a 20-page so-called over report. Now they have a 4-page budget at a glance in addition. And it was really in line with what Chuck was talking about, which was they wanted to reach more people with something that was not so overwhelming. Whether they've succeeded or not, they actually don't know. Distribution, which we have obviously challenges in. There are certain towns that actually send it out to every household. They're restricted to only those towns that are really town meeting oriented governance, where they have to send out town warrants to begin with before the meeting, so people know what's going to be discussed and the costs, it's everything. Everyone else does everything from mailing notice of them in the water bills and otherwise to let people know about it, but not actually sending the report. Many do it the way we do it, and which is put it out there in post offices, do social media PR. And in many cases, what's driving it seems to be the costs of printing and distribution. There are a lot of best practices that are recommended, and I don't think there was anyone that I found that actually conformed to them all. The one being keeping it short was fairly oftentimes violated. If we could switch to the next page, please, Mark. I don't know if people had a chance to click on the pictures which go to the actual things, but the longest one I found was from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. It's 32 pages long. They distribute it basically the way many others. They don't really print very many of them. Mostly you have to go to the town hall to get it or download the PDF. The shortest one I found was Henderson, Tennessee, although there's at least 4 or 5 others I found that are like this, which is basically one sheet of paper written on both sides or printed on both sides. And most of these seem to be done in Word and Excel the way we do ours. As I mentioned earlier, one city I ran across was Raleigh, which has in the past also won the GFOA award for best PAFR. They introduced in the last year a 4-page version, and as the director of Budget and Management Services emailed me, they basically wanted to take the mystery and awe out of the budget and provide residents with a simple 4-page document they would find easy to read and have quick access to, kind of in the Chuck mode. And then the one that was most interesting, it caught your attention, said in small print, this is our annual report, but the obvious message here was if you need answers to anything, we would promise it to you. And it certainly had the striking visuals to do that. Trying to get to, on the beyond the graphics to some of the numbers. The Barnstable's 2023 communication survey, which was sent out with the annual town census in January, got a response rate of about 30%, and about 6,500 people responded. And in that, they had a question which said, what are the top 3 things you'd like to get more information from the town about? And one of those 9 things that were asked was the town budget. And 1.5% of the respondents responded that that was in their top 3. So we obviously have a fairly narrow target population that has a high interest, which is greater than the number we print. But it's clearly a small group relative to the total population of about 40,000 adults in the town. In terms of the report feedback and engagement that we've been able to monitor to our overview report this year, we're basically not getting much feedback. We have had no use of the URLs in the document to go to places that have further information. We've gotten no complaints or questions or comments via email to the CFAC email address. And we have had a single, in up to today, I checked again, we've only had one survey response out of 350, of which I don't think all 350 have been taken yet. We've talked a little bit about print versus download. Everyone allows download of their reports. Not everyone prints it. Don't know, Mark, if you've gotten any update from Lynn as to downloads that they've collected. I know last meeting she hadn't given us any.
Yeah, I don't have anything yet, Neil. They have not, they're still working on establishing Google Analytics and so that they can determine and measure that for you. But I don't think they've got that up yet.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And really to the last bullet, the comparative numbers. Actually, just today I got an email back from GFOA, and they confirmed that they have never, they're thinking about it, but they don't have any metrics. They don't know of anybody with any metrics. It's the kind of ironic thing that a function that lives on numbers doesn't collect them relative to the ROI of what they're doing for the reports. So that's what I found. If anyone has any other questions, I can answer them.
Thank you, Neil. Anybody have any comments or questions about Neil's research and what he found and what other towns are doing?
Neil, I do have a question. We got a single web survey response.
Yes.
Do you know what the substance of that response was?
I can send everyone I think I actually sent it to Mark, but yeah, it was, they found there were only 3 questions, and it was, you did not have to identify yourself.
Yeah.
They found the report very helpful. They found sources of funds to be the most helpful. And they had, their suggestion to improve it was to lay out or to describe where the capital projects were by village.
By village.
Wow.
Not by precinct.
That's correct. And it's a great observation. That's you know, and as I think I probably parenthetically said to Mark, that's a rabbit hole I don't want to go into.
No.
Although actually, you know, and the funny thing is that information is all available from the town online.
Yeah. By village?
By GIS location, which gets it to you. So if you know the GIS location, you could basically know the village or the precinct. So it's there if you wanted it. And this is what I find. Pardon?
Sorry, Mark.
Go to our open budget website. I think the capital program, the homepage of the open budget website puts a star in every GIS map location on the town as to where the projects are for that year.
Yeah, it's very good. And it really, this reminds me of the 90% of the US population of adults says that it's either very important or somewhat important to vote, to be a part of society. But as we just saw in the latest election, less than 20% of the people voted. So this is one of those, and you see this in terms of all the surveys I found where people say it's 80%, 85% of the people say it's important for a town to make available its financial information, but only 20% feel that they actually know what it is. They just don't look. It's kind of a, you know, one of these things. It's not what they do; it's what they say.
Exactly. Yeah.
or vice versa.
Thank you
But
very
I-
much. What
but
I'd like, what I'd like to do is to ask the other members of the committee what you think of our present format, and whether you think that we need to make any adjustments to improve it. So let's go with Chris.
I think the present format for the report is good the way it is. I wouldn't make it any longer. I think if you make it shorter, I mean, you'd have to make cuts, and how do we decide what to cut from the report? I think it was pretty concise the way we set it up. So I don't know. I know Chuck had suggested like a 4-page type of report, but I don't know what the scope was that he was thinking as far as what information to have in that report. So I think it's fine the way it is, honestly. I think it delivered everything it needed to.
Thank you. Neil, you did all this research. What are your thoughts?
I guess it depends on what we're trying to accomplish. If it's to fill up slow time, I think it does that. So that objective is met. I don't have a sense from the data that we're seeing it's having much impact on the residents. And I'm not sure if that's an objective or not.
Well, you expanded the access that the public has with this report, and they have not responded. So based on my past experience, that's about right. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel like with a
what
report
about
like
the
this,
report? Yeah, what
Oh.
about the report itself?
I was just gonna say, I feel like a report like this, whoever's interested in it probably finds it as it is. I don't know that you're going to expand it too much. Even your own research, Neil, showing 1.5% of the population thought it was a high priority to know this stuff. Like you said, that's a very limited pool. I don't know that you can expand that really. If people don't want the information, I'm not sure you're going to get it to them no matter what,
Yeah, you've made it available. I will say this. When we first started these reports, it was 10 pages. We expanded it to 12 with the CWMP because we had to explain what CWMP was and what its impact on property owners was. So that's why we're now at 12 pages. Jim, you're new to this, so you read it for the first time. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've given you my quick thought. I mean, my thoughts about the report in specifically, I was as a resident of the town, when I looked at it, I thought it was very comprehensive. And I don't like taking away from that would be I think the report itself is readable. If you want to dive into it, you can. There's so much information there that I think that it's a good stake in the ground, if you will. My suggestion might be more along the way of how you want to communicate it, right? And how do you want this information, rather than wait for somebody to click on us? Why don't we click on them? In other words, do more outreach in the community where these areas of interest, especially CWMP and other areas, high profile areas, we are out in the community talking to civic leaders. It's just just another way to look at it. There's other push marketing techniques you could use through the town website or through Instagram, Facebook. I mean, there's other ways that we can push this information out that may draw interest.
Thank you.
I mean,
Chuck, I know that you want to do a Reader's Digest. Looking for your suggestions here. You're muted.
You'd think I'd get that by now. At the risk of repeating myself, maybe I'll try to say the same thing differently. As an old marketing guy, sometimes people don't know they need something till you tell them they need it. And so I don't necessarily like to just rely on, well, there's a group of people who read this thing, and I don't know that pushing it harder is going to increase readership. To me, kind of ignores market segmentation. And we may have a segment of the market that wants detail, and there may be another segment that says, geez, if you could make this a little more streamlined, I'd read it. But I see this thing at the library, or I see this thing at the market, and I just say, oh, who's going to read 12 pages? So I would still, I like, the answer to your question is, I like the document as it exists. I've only been on the committee a few years, but I like the way it's evolved. I like the content. I like the way it flows. But if it were me, not just to kill time, per Neil's earlier comment, I think there would be some value in putting out a shorter version of this and seeing what the reaction is, as opposed to pre-deciding that it's not worthwhile or that we need to fundamentally change the report. I just think there's a different target market we might attract with a version B of this thing. So
Thank you.
I realized I just said the same doggone thing twice, so apologies.
Well, you did it both articulately. Hector.
So one of the things I like about it is that we focus on the key numbers. I've scrolled through is it Portsmouth, New Hampshire, 32 pages. They start with the financial highlights on page 16. They have just a ton of fluff earlier on. We don't have any fluff. We give them the numbers. As far as trying to broaden the readership, I mean, my attitude about these things is, you can lead a horse to water, but if they don't want to drink, they're not going to drink. And so I think our saving grace is that we do focus on the key numbers. I think Neil has and others have brought some expertise to the table, so we have a lot more links in here. I'm looking at Neil's income spending and investment flows document. Neil, I still don't know how you did that, but it needs to be studied to be understood. To your credit, you tried to include substantive info about the fire districts and the water districts, which is really outside of our purview. But again, so I think I wouldn't make it longer, but I wouldn't make it shorter. What I would ask is, I think the print run amounted to about $1.90 for 350 copies, something like that, Mark. Is there a way to cut those costs by putting it on less expensive paper stock, and with a view to somehow distributing it to every household? And I think we spend a lot of money on very fancy printing, but we might be able to cut some of those costs and then shift them to distribution expenses, like a bigger print run, more extensive distribution, that sort of thing. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you for your suggestions. Well, I'm the oldest rat in this barn here, and I've been around a long time, and I like the format of our report. And I like the quality of the printing. There's a certain gravitas about it that says this is a serious document from the Finance Committee, and we think enough about the public that we want to share this information with you. So I personally don't think we should have fewer pages, because if and when CWMP becomes more streamlined, perhaps we could cut down one page. But generally speaking, we've covered all of the issues. We talk about the revenue, we talk about the spending, we talk about the investments, and I think this gives every resident or prospective resident and business a summary of what's going on in the town and its operations. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, here's something to think about, that builds on both Chuck's and Hector's points about, we can reduce I would suggest that we actually do 2 reports next year. We do the current 12-page report, and we do a 2-page report, 1 sheet of paper, both sides. And that we print the 2-page report and we distribute that. And then we put the 12-page report online with links to it from the 2-page. And the reason I would do that is we can print 4,000 of the 2-page documents, which has a much higher chance of being picked up by more people. And then it'd be easy to get, as most towns it appears now do, to download the PDF if you're interested in more than the revenue sources and uses and the capital investment. It's basically a teaser document that we could do for the same or less money than we're currently spending on 350 copies and touch as many as 4,000 people. So by adding 1 more, I think we might be able to test a theory that I think both Chuck and I have, that there's more people out there than 350.
I think you have a distribution problem with 4,000. If we don't know whether the 350 have all been distributed, we will definitely have a problem with the 4,000. I'm just pointing this out.
You're assuming that.
I am assuming that.
Right.
There are not enough post offices and people who go to post offices and libraries to pick up those 4,000.
Right, but we don't do the adult center, we don't do HYCC, we don't do the airport, we don't do a lot of places where there might be people that would pick it up. I mean, we don't actually know who's picking them up from the post office.
Well, we know there are probably people who use there are people who use those particular post offices who live in the neighborhood. But anyway, that's a good suggestion, and we'll keep that for another day, for another discussion. And you've given us something to think about. And again, thank you very much for going through. I mean, that was just a tremendous research project and all of your interviews and studies. Thank you very much.
I think Neil did a great job. I have another idea regarding distribution, and forgive me if this was mentioned in a prior meeting, but the town weekly e-newsletter. Mark, do you know what the distribution of it? I think Lynn said it's in the thousands, is it not?
Yes, it is, Hector.
Could we send a PDF? Could we take advantage of that mailing list and send a PDF of the 12-page document to that list?
I could check. I could ask Lynn if we could do that.
Yeah.
But that would be a really good way of getting it out there.
I think
it has
Lynn has publicized that with her e-letter.
Right. She publicized it, but it's another thing just to serve it up to them as a special, a special CFAC edition. Here's CFAC's annual report. Feel free to read through it and reach out to us if you have additional questions. Neil, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think I'd be interested in her response. I think if I were in her position, I'd be cautious because that's basically spamming people, which is what she wants to do.
I don't think it's spam. I think it's sending people real information about where their tax dollars are going. It's not spurious information. It's substantive information that maybe a lot of people aren't aware of. So I think it's anything but spam.
But
it's unsolicited. You're right, but it's certainly not spam.
the, you know, the e-letter is basically like a Reader's Digest.
Right.
It's high points of what's happening. And so
Right.
people who get it basically scan it to see what's happening in town. And
Right.
so they say, okay, here's this 12-page. Well, I maybe don't have that much time. Maybe I'll go back.
But how, it
we can-
doesn't cost us anything to send it.
Let's ask Lynn if it's possible. Okay, let's move on now to the 24 tax levy shifting options. Mark broadcast that on Channel 8 a while back, and if you saw it, it was well done. So, Mark, you can tell us about it.
Thank you, Lillian. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
So this is the presentation that we provided to the town council at their last meeting in preparation for some anticipated votes at the first meeting in December. Every year, as you are very familiar with this process, the town council has to take a couple of votes prior to us issuing the final or third and fourth quarter tax bills every year. And those include whether or not to split the tax rate between the residential class and the commercial, industrial, and personal property class, or the CIP class. And the other one being whether or not to continue with a residential exemption. We've had a 20% residential exemption in place since 2006. And every year we ask the council if they want to continue with that or change it up. So both of these options do not impact the total amount of the tax levy that we will raise, as you know. They merely decide whether or not we should shift around some of the allocation of that levy between classes, and for the residential exemption between property taxpayers within the residential class only. That tax levy shifting option has no impact on the CIP classes, but the split tax rate has an impact on all classes, residential and CIP. And I think you're all very familiar with how that works from your past experience. So how do we allocate the tax levy? It's based on the valuation by class: residential, commercial, industrial, and personal. Every year we update the valuations. The valuations provided by our assessing operations, and here's what the values look like for fiscal year 2024. 24.5 billion in property valuation, with predominantly made up of residential value, or almost 90% in the residential class. These values are all based on calendar year 2022 sales data. That's the last full calendar year's worth of sales data that we have, and that's what we're required to use to set values. So we're always a little bit behind the actual market. So assessed values don't necessarily reflect today's market values, but they're pretty close. Because again, they're based on calendar year 2022 activity. Here's the change in those assessed values year over year from FY23 to FY24. You can see we had overall a 12% increase in property value for the town, going from 21.8 billion to 24.5 billion. Again, most of that being in the residential class, because we're predominantly a residential community. And so that's where the big change is. Across the board, it averaged 13%. Some areas, some residential areas will see higher percentage increases in their assessed values, and others will see lower percentage increase in their assessed values. But on average, across town, we went up 13% in the residential class. Not much change for the commercial or industrial class. Different market than the residential class. But the personal property tax class, we did see a significant increase in. And that's mainly related to the Vineyard Wind project coming online.
Right.
As they build out the infrastructure for that project. We're starting to capture that growth, and they will begin receiving tax bills on that. They've actually, this will be fiscal year 24 will be the third or second year tax bill for them. But about half of that $111 million growth in the personal property tax class is Vineyard Wind. Personal property is predominantly made up of utilities, NSTAR, Horizon, Vineyard Wind, the telephone companies, natural gas pipelines, and so forth.
Mark, I have a question. What's the as of date for the valuation of personal property? The beginning of calendar 2023?
Calendar year 2022, yes, yep.
2022 is
No,
January 1?
2023.
Okay, and that's also true with the other three categories. January 1 of 2023.
January 1, that's right. That's why calendar year 2022 sales data is used to come up with the values. So
right.
January 1, 2023, day one after 2022. Those we set the values and ownership data as of those dates for tax billing purposes.
Okay, so the ownership data for residential is based on 2022.
Value is.
Valuation data is based on an average across an average over the year 2022.
Residential property values are based on sales data we collect for calendar 2022.
Okay, over the course of the calendar year. But the personal property tax that's assessed as of the end of 2022, right? A point in time as opposed to
what's reported to us, yep, as of the end of 2022. So for example, Vineyard Wind as of December 31st or January 1, 2023,
right?
This is the value of the construction that they've had in place at that point in time.
Right. And that valuation I mean, this seems obvious, but I'm just curious. Is that valuation based on our assessors' interaction with the Vineyard Wind people and asking them their costs to install the infrastructure?
Yes, they are required to fill out a report every year and send it to the assessor's office, declaring under under the oath of perjury, whatever the term that is used down there. This is the valuation of the infrastructure that we have in place as of this date. Now that's all subject to audit. We do have the right to go in and go in and audit that data if we wanted to. We would probably need to hire an outside auditor to actually go in, and sit down with their financial team and go through their finances and show to us, okay, show us how you came up with that number.
Right. But is it your understanding that reflects the cost
yes.
of the installed infrastructure as of the end of 2022?
Correct.
That's essentially what they're representing.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. That's the growth year over year. So the next thing we do is this is what our tax levy for fiscal year 2024 looks like. We take the previous year's tax levy limit, which was 138.6 million in fiscal year 23. Proposition 2.5 allows communities to raise that by 2.5%. For us, it's 3,465,000. And then we had new property growth of a little more than 1.5 million, giving us a levy limit of 143.6 million for the year. And then we're allowed to add to that any voter approved debt exclusions or other special assessments like the Cape Cod Commission to the tax levy. And those two numbers are reflected here to arrive at a maximum allowable tax levy of $145,995,000. The tax levy that we used to balance the fiscal year 2024 budget was $145,205,000. leaving us some remaining excess tax capacity, about just under $800,000 of excess tax capacity. And that capacity just rolls forward to the following fiscal year. So that's how we arrived at our tax levy. And the decisions that the town council are being asked to make are, okay, how will we allocate that $145,205,000?
Mark.
Again, won't change the amount of levy that we raise. It'll only decide if we want to shift some of it between classes or within taxpayers' residential class.
Mark,
Sir.
I have a question. The Cape Cod Commission assessment,
Yes.
that's money that the town of Barnstable paid to the Cape Cod Commission or will pay, or?
That's the amount that are assessed in fiscal year 2024. We will pay that in fiscal year 2024.
And what do we get for that money?
They're a regional planning agency. If they, is approved by the voters back in the late 1980s, early 1990s to create that agency, and they're a regional planning agency. So, they do a lot of technical services for communities, whether it's traffic and studies, or they have to do reviews of projects that are being proposed and they have a regional impact and so forth.
Okay.
Yeah, they're a regional planning agency.
Okay.
So then we take that tax levy and we allocate it based on the valuations, the percentage valuations for each class. So residential being almost 90% of the valuation in the town of Barnstable will have to pay, the 89.86% of that tax levy, or $130,481,000. So this is how the tax levy gets allocated between the classes. It's all based on the valuations of each one of those classes. Then how do we arrive at our tax rate? Well, we take that $145 million tax levy divided by the assessed value of $24.5 billion, and then we multiply that by 1,000 because tax rates are stated in terms of $1,000 per valuation, and that gives us a tax rate of $5.92 for fiscal year 24, and that tax rate is actually 51 cents less than the fiscal year 23 tax rate, and that's because the percentage increase in property values exceeds the percentage increase in the tax levy. Property values went up 12%, tax levy went up 3.2%, and so that's why we have a drop in the tax rate. When you take that denominator in that equation and it goes up at a faster percentage rate than the numerator, you're going to end up with a small number. So here's a history of our tax levy allocation by class between the residential levy and the CIP levy. Back in fiscal year 15, we were looking at about an 88-12% split between the residential and the CIP classes. And at that point in time, the residential levy was 94 million and the CIP levy was 12.5 million. Jump forward 10 years later, fiscal year 24, our tax levy is up to $145 million. We're about 36.12% from where it was in fiscal year 15. That residential levy, however, has grown at a faster pace than that, than an overall average. It has grown 38.64%, and the CIP levy has grown at a smaller percentage than the overall percentage increase in the levy, or 17.2%. And that's because the valuation of our residential class is going up faster than the valuation of our CIP class. So, for an example, this isn't a proposal or a suggestion, it's just to illustrate how shifting the tax levy would work and how the split tax rate tool could be used. If the town council, for example, wanted to look at this over a 10-year period, they could look at this year over year, past 2 years, past 3 years, or past 10 years, for example. But for this example, I used 10-year look back. So let's say if we wanted to have both tax levies go up 36.12%, so that there was equal growth in both sides of the tax levy, they would have to shift approximately $2,377,000 from the residential class to the CIP class. And this is the split tax rate option allows, communities to do a scenario like that if they felt it was the correct tax policy. So what would that look like? So if we were to adopt a percentage shift of 1.15, that would get the growth in the tax levy over that 10 period about equal to one another, or 36.12%. And the resulting residential rate would drop from $5.92 to $5.82 or 10 cents. But the increase in the CIP rate would go up considerably from 5.92 to 6.81, or almost a whole dollar. And that's because we're predominantly a residential community. So the money saved on the residential side, that $2.3 million, would get dispersed amongst 25,000 residential taxpayers, and there's only a few thousand CIP taxpayers that would have to pay that additional amount. So there's not a big tax benefit from this for the residential class, but there's a significant tax impact on the CIP class. And for example, here's what the bills would look like at different shifts. So if we had a factor of 1, same tax rate for both classes, a property valued at the median residential value of $575,000, and a corresponding commercial property valued at $575,000, would pay the same amount of tax, for about $3,400. Once you start shifting it, you can see the commercial tax bill goes up considerably, and there's a very small benefit to the residential tax bill at the corresponding shift rate. And again, that's just because, again, we're 90% residential by class and valuation.
And Mark, can I ask on that? I assume when you look at numbers like that, there's either an assumption or some analysis that's gone into the impact on, CIP taxpayer, stability. Were you to do some of that? I mean, I get the theory behind the numbers, but I assume that somebody says, well, the reason we really can't do this is we don't want businesses to leave or to. I assume there's some discussion somewhere where that happens. Am I right?
Yeah, I not with us internally. We don't set tax policy at the administration level. So we don't interview. We don't go out and do studies of our local small business owners to find out, hey, what do you think the shift would do to you? However, those taxpayers have come to the council hearings, public hearing on this option, and have commented in the past about the impacts it would have on their business if we were to adopt a separate tax rate. So we really leave it up to the community and any the public feedback we would get at the public hearing on such a policy. But we don't do an in-depth study of how this would impact our local business community. But keep in mind that much of our local business community is a small business operator, not major corporations, and so these are very small sole proprietors, and many of them, I think, would agree that this type of tax policy would have a significant impact on their operation.
Thank you. That's a good answer, because I was basically asking, is there any kind of market feedback on this? And the answer is yes. So that's a good answer.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. So, but it's also true, Mark, that a business taxpayer on his business tax return can deduct as a cost of business state and local taxes that he pays, whereas most consumers can't deduct their residential property taxes. So this, for example, is showing at the far right, it shows $5,108 in taxes paid by a commercial taxpayer. But after that number gets deducted off of his or her federal income tax and probably his state income taxes as well. So the actual dollar cost to that business is not $508. It's something less than that. So I'm just making the point that yes, this would definitely impact businesses' investment decisions, but they get some tax benefit from the higher commercial property taxes. If they paid higher property taxes, they would get some tax shield from that.
Again, yeah, that's not our decision to decide whether or not we should
Right.
some taxes. But this provides, some information from just the financial impact, but when you get down to each individual taxpayer's personal situation, where we are in no position to be able to evaluate what that might be.
Right.
We don't advise on tax policy either. I mean,
Right.
Income tax income policy as well.
Right, but I'm just saying, and it is true that the actual impact of the higher taxes on the business taxpayer is not what's shown on the screen here, because they get some tax benefit on their federal and state taxes. Anyway, go ahead.
Are there any other questions on the split tax rate option?
No,
No.
that's
Okay.
very clear.
All right. So moving on to the residential exemption. Again, we've had this in place since our fiscal year 2006. The town council can authorize up to a 35% exemption for Barnstable residents. Property must be the primary residence of the owner of the property and used for income tax filing purposes. And they must have owned the property as of January 1, 2023 to qualify for the 2024 exemption. This option only shifts taxes within the residential class, doesn't affect the CIP class. There were 18 communities that adopted this out of 351 in fiscal year 2023, and the list is provided here in this table to the right. It reduces the taxable assessed value for each qualifying primary residence before the tax is calculated. And we had approximately 11,630 qualified property. At the time of this presentation, we had 11,630 qualified properties, but that changes every day. People come in and file for it. People lose it upon the transfer of ownership, for example. The resultant adoption would be a higher tax rate for all residential properties and a deduction from every qualified property's value before the tax is calculated. And you can see there's more and more Cape communities have been adopting this. I think Mashpee just joined last year with a 5%, Oak Bluff's at 8%. Tisbury's had it for a while at 22, Nantucket at 25, Truro at 30. I think Truro went up to 30. Wellfleet at 30. Provincetown has the maximum at 35. So this is how we calculate it. We take that total residential value and we divide it by the number of total residential parcels to come up with the average residential value, which is $857,277. And then, for example, if we were to stick with a 20% residential exemption, we multiply that 857,000 by 20% to arrive at the FY24 exemption value, which is $171,455. Multiply that by the eligible parcels, and you would come up with 1.9 billion, almost $2 billion of residential valuation that ends up not getting taxed. Now, the tax levy raised from the residential class still remains the same at 130 million, but now we have 2 billion less in value that's being taxed. So what happens? The tax rate for this class goes up. And here's how that gets calculated. Take the residential value, reduce it by the value exempted to come at a net tax value, divide that residential levy into that, and we come up with a $6.51 tax rate for the residential class, which is more than the $5.92 if we didn't have a residential exemption. So what does it look like? This chart illustrates what the tax bills would look like at various valuations here. The blue bar represents if no residential exemption were adopted by the town council. The orange bar represents a 20% residential exemption for a qualifying property, and the gray bar represents the tax bill for a 20% residential exemption for a non-qualifying property. So you can see the greatest tax benefit under this option is received by property values at the lower end of the scale. So a 200, for example, $250,000 property, you see a tax bill that goes from, with no exemption, from $1,480 to $512. And that valuation of that tax benefit shrinks a little bit as the property's value goes up, all the way till you get to $1,890,000, and that's about the break-even point. So if we had no residential exemption in place, a property valued at $1,890,000 would pay $11,189 in taxes. With a 20% residential exemption and qualifying for that 20% residential exemption, they would pay the same amount of taxes. And then above that, those properties qualifying for the residential exemption would pay a little bit more than if there were no residential exemption adopted. So again, this tool shifts the portion of the residential property tax to non-qualifying property owners, as well as qualifying property owners at higher valuations.
Mark, what's the logic of a non-qualifying 20%?
Non-qualifying is a property, a second homeowner, an apartment, residential properties that is not the primary residence of the owner. So it really it shifts more property taxes to second homeowners, vacation homeowners, etc. But apartment complexes pay more under this option as well, because apartment complex would, like Everlay out in Independence Park, they wouldn't qualify for the residential exemption.
Okay.
Well, what is the difference between the no exemption and that second homeowner non-qualifying?
So for example, property valued at $250,000.
Right.
And we had no residential exemption adopted by the town council, would pay $1,480 in taxes.
Right.
If the town council adopted a 20% residential exemption, and the owner of that $250,000 property did not qualify for that residential exemption, their tax bill would be $1,628, which is represented by the gray bar. They would pay more in taxes than if we had no residential exemption in place, because they don't qualify for the.
I got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
And you can see for the third one, the third example in here is our median residential assessed value of $575,000. You can see with the tax bill savings for adopting a 20% residential exemption, again,
right,
about $700 for the median residential value.
Right.
Mark, I'm curious, has the town council, has there been any serious discussion in the last several years of raising the exemption from the 20% level? I mean, mindful of what Truro and Wellfleet have done?
Not serious, Hector, no. There have been some comments in the past that we should perhaps think about increasing it or even decreasing it, but not a lot. There hasn't really been any real interest in moving it one way or the other. I think they've been pretty consistent. They have been consistent with the 20% exemption amount, but we've never had any serious conversations, as you put it, on changing off of that number. And I think if we were to do so, we would probably need to spend some time discussing, what the impacts would mean. Why would we do that?
Right.
What would be the reason behind doing that? Because again, this is tax policy. And I think we would want the town council to be fully informed of what the impact would be if they were to change it either direction. Because once you establish this, it's going to be very hard to kind of like take it away when you look at the tax bill savings for a median residential assessed value. And if we were to start reducing that, everyone's taxes are starting to start going up as a result of the increase in the tax levy and a smaller reduction for the residential exemption if they were to go down from the 20%, for example. And so that would probably create a lot of conversation about why would we do that?
Right. Well, you could fashion an argument that year-round residents are, are valuable to the town and ought to be incented to live year-round, as opposed to the many people who have second or third homes here who for whom the higher tax burden wouldn't be.
We've heard similar types of comments like in the past. We've heard, well, because of the second homeowners are driving up the property values in town, right? That's some argue that why we're seeing an increase in our assessed values is because, and it's making it unaffordable for others to live here.
Right.
Yeah.
Homeowners are coming in and buying up these properties at prices that are market, above market, resulting in everyone's property value going up. Now that's good if you already own a home here because you're seeing a return on your investment, but you're not cashing out on it because you're still living there. But the result is, hey, if they're going to come in and drive up our property values, let's give the primary homeowners, or those who claim Barnstable as their principal residence, a tax break as a result.
Right. I noticed that Paul is nodding. So would you like to provide some comments?
Thank you, Lillian. Yeah, I appreciate it. I would concur with what Mark was just mentioning. It has been consistent, at least during the time that I've been on the council, the 20% exemption. And we have had although increases in taxes is always, that's the bitter pill that we swallow with the cost of the town, running the town. But it has been at least, let's call it a consistent increase. And I'm always fearful that, like I've seen in many towns, the Vineyard, especially in Tisbury, where I do own a home over there, and they really they hit the businesses pretty hard over there. It's just the property mix. But to kind of a wider view, I was frankly shocked this year, and Mark, you might be able to elaborate on it, of the $857,000 average assessed value in town. Now, I know that isn't the median value, right? That's the average assessed value, but I might be mistaken, but I think maybe 6 years ago, for some reason, I feel like it was somewhere in the 400,000 or 440,000. I mean, it's literally that average assessed value is doubled, and it's shocking to a degree. When you think about the accelerated rate of property values, whether they deserve to be or not is a whole different point. But that is really the fact. I brought that out in the Centerville Civic Association meeting, and again at Town Council, and it's just one of those things that when you look at there's a portion of this population that, boy, that is really going to be struggling terribly to be able to live here at those kind of rates. But anyways, that's a side point. But
Yeah.
I would
Right.
think what you're saying,
But that would be an argument for increasing the residential exemption
That
to
is
mitigate some of that average assessment increase, Paul, that you talked about.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is true. Mhm.
When do you anticipate the town council to make a decision on this residential rate?
I believe it comes up on our next meeting. Is that correct, Mark? I believe so, correct? Yeah, December 7th. Yeah.
Wow.
Mhm. Yeah,
There's
we
some-
had,
there's-
we had our first reading at our last meeting. And so that it will come up at our December 7th meeting this coming
Wow.
month.
And this hasn't changed for, for the past couple of decades. It's been the same, no split tax rate, 20% residential exemption. I think, existing counselors that were, that are still on the council are very familiar with this. But for the benefit of the new counselors, we've been trying to get the information out early and often so that they have the benefit of understanding what these tax levy shifting options are. But we have not changed from what has been approved over the past 2 years. It's been consistently adopting the same tax policy strategy since 2006.
Does the town council, Mark, receive this presentation in advance?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like Councilor Neary was saying, we gave it to them at their last council meeting. They
Okay.
distributed it a couple of days before the actual meeting. I did a town talk, part of the town manager's last communications. I did this presentation, which is available on the town's website as well. Our director of assessing actually gave the presentation to the town council at the last meeting. I'll be providing an abbreviated version of it at the December 7th meeting. And Lane and I have made ourselves available for any counselor who would like to come in and talk more about this. And I have had a couple of new counselors reach out to me. One will be actually meeting with me in person tomorrow to go over some of this information as well as other information.
Yeah. Well, there's so many new counselors coming in. Or have they reached out to you for more explanation of how this works?
A couple have, yeah.
Good.
And a meeting with one again tomorrow. Yes.
Yeah, because it's quite a big turnover.
Yeah, actually, Council Turkelson, who's here tonight, joined us this meeting, did reach out to me over the weekend about this.
Thank you very much. Does
Well,
that,
Lillian, one other point I wanted to make on this chart here is that even if you're a property owner at the far right-hand side of this scale, who owns a $2,250,000 residential property, it's still to your tax benefit to file for the residential exemption.
sure,
Okay, because you can, even though you'll pay more than if no exemption were adopted, you're going to save $1,116, which is the difference between the orange bar and the gray bar. And then
right.
because you'll get $171,000 of valuation tax exempt.
Mhm.
So it's still to your benefit to file for the residential exemption, even though your tax bill is higher with the 20% residential exemption than if there were no exemption.
Good point. Do any members have any more comments or questions of Mark?
I have one that's not directly from the chart, actually, but I looked at last year's similar presentation. And last year, the median residential value went up about 30%, and the average went up also about 30%, 28. This year, the median residential values are going up around 7%, but the average is going up 13%. What's causing that divergence? Do you know?
Well, the
Some-
median, I think it's, just the 2021 was a real unusual
Right.
year for the
It's a
residential
banner
real
year.
estate market. It was a very strong residential real estate market. 2022 was still strong, but not as strong. So I think that is the reason why you see the median down, the percentage increase less than it was from the previous year. And the average, I don't know on the average, Neil, off the top of my head,
Yeah, I was thinking that somehow the assessor slope is changed. I would have thought that so that's what I was trying to understand. I would have thought that the more affordable houses would be going up at least the same rate as they were in the past.
I think what you're seeing, Neil, is that waterfront property, the real high-end property are seeing very significant assessed value increases versus the inland property in the more modest neighborhoods. Because
I think that's what's causing it.
Well, that's what caused it last year. but it also happened, but the median also went up at the same rate as
Right.
in the first year when the new waterfront property significant hit occurred. So I was just trying to figure out what happened, but I'll look at the data when it's updated on the website.
Well, at some point, if you all are interested, we can ask Lane to come by and tell us about the whole assessment and where it's happening. If you're interested. Well, thank you, Mark. That was really a comprehensive report on how to shift it, and we'll see what the town council does in December. Moving on to the calendar year, you receive the meeting schedule for next year, and it's fairly straightforward. And I believe that we had decided that we would continue to meet on Zoom. We have the option to meet in person. So if anybody would like to change from Zoom to in person, speak up. Looks like Zoom's it.
Well, I'd meet in person if we could do it at Chuck's house with the drinks and the food that he put out.
You know, even when Chuck's not there.
Yeah, so Zoom it is.
But I'm comfortable with Zoom. I think it's I've gotten used to it, and I feel like our meetings are quite substantive.
Yes, I think it's a good participation by everybody, and unless I hear otherwise, we're going to continue with Zoom. Okay, we now have the 2025 fiscal 25 budget calendar. The CIP task force workshop is going to take place on December 14th. And Neil is signed up to go, and we have, if any other member would like to go to that, please let us know. And Hector, did you raise your hand?
No.
Oh, I thought you did. Oh, okay.
Mm.
For anybody who hasn't been to it and has the time, I recommend it.
That's Thursday, December 14th.
December 14th. You went last year, right, Chuck?
I did. Wendy and I went. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. You're it, Neil.
Hey, it's got a free lunch, I hear, so.
Yeah, it does. There's lunch.
I wonder, actually, I noticed on the calendar, it also says that the CIP task force was provided a copy, or was supposed to be provided a copy of all the submissions as of today. Did that happen? And if so, can I get a copy?
Excuse me.
No, Neil, you cannot, no. So we have,
You know how many hundreds there are?
hundreds of projects that have been submitted. I don't want to inundate you with paper, and it's problematic trying to email that many documents. So we are not, what we're trying to do is work with our IT department to create links so that you can access all of the submissions via internet by some links. So once that's done and made available, we'll send it to every committee member. But the task force did not receive the projects yet either. We're still waiting for a department to submit their narratives. They have not completed their submissions yet.
Okay, I didn't mean to be facetious. I remember last year you sent out a whole one huge PDF.
And we're trying to avoid that this year.
Okay.
Well, just as an anecdote, Jim will remember this as well. Back in the old days, all of the CIP projects were sent over to CFAT. This was before the town manager had his proposed CIP projects. So we would go through 100 of those things and evaluate. And we were so pleased when the town manager decided to submit his proposed projects. So it has simplified the process by a lot.
Yeah.
Speaking of this, I think while we are all here, why don't we decide who is going to be on what committee? There are two subcommittees, as you know, the CIP and the operating budget. And it would be nice, since we now have 8 people, and Chuck and I don't have to do double duty this year. So why don't we go through and see who would like to do what? Chris? You have a preference?
I do not have a preference, so whatever I need to do, I will do.
Well, that's not definitive, but
Well, if anybody does have a preference,
very
they can
agreeable,
state it
yes.
first. But
I think
So I have a
Neil-
What are the committee options again, please, for my benefit?
they're capital and operating.
Okay,
You remember those?
yeah,
Yeah,
so I'll do capital.
is this
I'll
Jim?
I'll
Jim?
do capital as well.
I think Neil wants to do capital.
Oh,
sounds like I'll be doing operating budget then.
Okay,
well, if you have too many, I can switch over with Chris to do operating as well, if that's better. That makes it easier.
well, we've still got Chuck there, out there.
Yep, and I'm like Chris. I'm happy to do wherever there's a need. So if operating is needs
Well,
more bodies, I'm on it, Lillian.
Well, you were such a marvelous sub chair last year, and you were our scribe and our editor, and we had sent out something like 12 drafts. You're on.
That's not something I'm proud of, Lillian.
We did a good job. I'll be on operating, and that leaves Jackie and Wendy. So we will see what they do. Is there anything else to come before the committee?
Good, since I'm volunteer for capital, if you need another body on that Thursday meeting, I'm not sure what time it is, but I would be happy to go.
Okay, it is, I think, what is it? 10 to 3, Mark?
Yes, I believe so, but I'll send a calendar invite to both Neil and Jim.
Okay, thank you. And Jim, I think it's in the in town hall.
Yes,
Yeah. The selectmen's room?
yes.
Okay.
Conference room.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Is there any correspondence from committee members? Mark? What should we do next time? I think we're scheduled for one meeting in December 11th. We're not ready for schools yet, are we?
No, not for the, we can, I'm thinking by December 11th, we'll have all the CIP submissions.
Oh,
Perhaps we can target bringing in, maybe we start with the school department and have them present their top priorities for fiscal year 25 for their capital.
that would be
submission.
great, because the list that you sent out is tremendous.
Yes, I believe, I
What
think
is
I should,
$175 million worth of
Yeah.
CIP projects.
yeah, those aren't for 5 years, it's more than 5
Yeah.
years. But yeah, you get the gist of what they
We do.
included, priority 1, 2s, and 3s, and what they were. So I think maybe at your next meeting, you'll want to start there and have to invite the school department, and I'll check with their availability.
Okay, that'll be great. Thank you very much. So we'll look to see if that's possible. That being said, if there's no other business before the committee, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Second.
Chuck, it's been moved and seconded to adjourn the meeting. Chuck, will you call the roll, please?
Lillian,
Yes.
Neil,
Yes.
Hector,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
and Chuck is yes, so we're good.